Hi, today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about some IRL people and what we learn about Bards from this IRL event about Dungeons and Dragons class Bard. Um, Boy, there's a lot here. All right, let's unpack this. So we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to talk about Adnan Syed. We're going to talk about Hae Min Lee, and we're going to talk about Young Lee, and we're going to talk about Sarah Koenig. All right. So Hae Min Lee was a high school student in Baltimore, and she was murdered and buried in a shallow. She was strangulated and buried in a shallow grave. I know this because I and 100 million minimum other people listen to this, right? And it is, and this was on. It was the first season of the Serial podcast, and honestly, it's really, to my knowledge, it's the only season of Serial podcast that matters. Sarah Koenig had an absolutely staggering success with Serial, with season one podcast. It put legit. This powerfully put podcasting on the map. It happened in 2014. I think podcasting is maybe about 15 years old, which would put it in like 2008. And to this day, podcasting is still niche. It's really not mainstream at all. Many people have never listened to a single podcast, right? And the reason why is you need this special download to do it. And it's an incredibly interesting medium because it is a lot like, podcasting is a lot like Dungeons and Dragons. It only attracts the wealthy, right? Like, at the macro level. At the 51% level, there is absolutely no need for podcasts to even exist anymore. Every single thing you can do with a podcast framework, you could do much, much easier and with far greater grasp with YouTube, right? And so there's no reason for podcasts to even exist anymore. But they very much do exist, and they make bank way more than the average. The average podcast that is successful makes far more money than the average YouTube. And that's one of the reasons why it exists is advertisers figured this out. The only people who listen to podcasts are wealthy. So if you simply do podcast ads, you're only reaching the wealthy at the macro level. You'll get a few exceptions, but generally at like the 80-90% level. And I think, unfortunately, I wish this was not true. I think Dungeons & Dragons is exactly the same. Dungeons & Dragons is a coastal elite, highly educated draw right now. And the reason why is just, it has, not kidding, current Dungeons & Dragons, Perkinian Dungeons & Dragons, has 8,000 pages of canon. Like, who is not highly educated going to even deigned to connect themselves to anything that takes 8,000 pages of reading, right? Like, you're just going to attract wealthy, educated people. And at the macro level, I really think that's what's happening with Dungeons & Dragons. You're like, oh no, Scott, that's not true. And then I'm like, did you see they just dropped a $2,000 mini of one dragon for Dungeons & Dragons? This is a wealthy niche activity, all right? So, all right, so here's the thing, all right? I've been telling you, Dungeons & Dragons ain't what you think it is. You think it's a game about cutting goblins in half. You are dead wrong. You could not be more wrong if you made a wrong sandwich with wrong sauce, wrong meat, and wrong cheese, right? And then cut it with a wrong knife. You could not be more wrong. Dungeons & Dragons is a lot of things. In my humble opinion, it ain't nothing. It has never been a game. It is at minimum, it is a life simulation module, right? It is a narrative engine, right? I believe it's a human improvement engine, right? So, and here, like, and the IRL is proving this, okay? So first of all, right now, we are doing such an incredibly crap job of running Dungeons and Dragons. We do every dungeon master on the planet is just doing a horrible crap job of running Dungeons and Dragons. And the reason why is we have allowed ourselves as a community to only focus on combat. right? And we've gone into deep complexity on combat for 48 years. But this Adnan Syed situation, okay, so proves how much Dungeons and Dragons, how we haven't even scratched the surface on where we need to land with Dungeons and Dragons, okay? And in my opinion, this Adnan Syed situation proves it. This Adnan Syed, Sarah Koenig situation proves it. So let's get all the way there, okay? So Hae Min Lee is murdered, strangled, and buried in a shallow grave, okay? Adnan Syed is picked up by the Baltimore law enforcement, and an investigation starts. And the investigation, this is what's put up by Baltimore legal system. Let's knock it out. Here we go. Adnan Syed, one of his associates, comes forward and says, me and Adnan Syed buried her in a shallow grave. Okay. Immediately, they requisition his phone records from AT&T. Phone records show him within the proximity, night of the burial, in the exact proximity of the exact park where she was buried. Okay. Then search of his phone, and I know all of this because Sarah Koenig put it on a podcast, not a podcast, the podcast. This put podcasts on the map. Like, it was stunning the amount of success Sarah Koenig reached with this, right? And I listened to this. It was 11 episodes, I think, right? And in episode 6, they said the thing. I was like, oh, bet Adnan Syed, in my humble opinion, is absolutely guilty. And Sarah Koenig was putting this information up for you to decide. She literally says multiple times, you decide what, is he innocent or guilty? Let's just take a look, right? And that's the whole thing, right? So I'm watching, and then they said the bombshell, right? Adnan Syed had a rhythm, had a frequency of texting Hae Min Lee, right? The moment she went missing, he never texted her again. I was like, that's it. That's done. Like, yeah, because you know how teens text, right? Like, basically, it was like, I was like, okay, that's great that you have that's great that you have this, a witness, and that's great that you have these phone records there, but, like, the only, and you're like, oh my gosh, he didn't text because he knew, right? Like, he knew where she was. He wasn't going to text her because he knew there wasn't going to be an answer, right? Like, and so, in my humble opinion, based on Sarah Koenig's research, I was like, oh yeah, Adnan Syed is fully guilty. So that was my humble opinion at the time. That's my humble opinion at this moment, right? But here is what we have to learn, right? So what do you as a dungeon master think a bard is for? What do they do? Oh, they go strum-a-lum-a-lum-lum-lum. Oh, and that means the fighter can cut the goblin in half more easily. You are a fool. You are a fool. The world is showing us how the bard structures. Sarah Koenig is an IRL bard. And she said, hey, Baltimore, I know you guys gave your justice. I'm a bard. Done. Flipped. Freed. Right? And Adnan Syed is out of prison because a bard said he will be out of prison. A bard will not allow the state's justice to stand. It's finished. I have strum-a-lummed, and you are done. Right? And that's when we realize this is where we're heading in Dungeons and Dragons. The IRL tells us how to model how to create the modular engine in Dungeons and Dragons that lets us simulate life, right? And the idea that government rulers choose justice is completely proven wrong now. Podcasts choose justice. Bards choose justice. And you haven't even started to Dungeon Master the Bard right. They are massively powerful. They are more powerful than the kings, the queens, the lords, the liches. They can undo justice with a decision. They can undo justice with blink, 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 blink. And that's what you've seen. Sarah Koenig had said, Baltimore, your justice means nothing. I've done a podcast. Your justice means nothing. I decide who is out of prison and who is in prison. And that's the world we live in. So if you are laughing because you don't think the Bards subclass is strong enough, you don't understand Bards. And the IRL just told us exactly what Bards can do and how powerful they are. And there ain't a king or queen on this planet or on any D&D realm that's more powerful than a Bard. That's the reality of it. All that is my humble opinion. I'd love to hear your humble opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.